أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أفضل الصلاة والتسليم. ما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صدق رسوله الكريم. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we're continuing our discussion from last week, which revolves around the surah of Surah Al-Ahzab. So if you'd like to follow around Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 23, basically, in a way, this entire series or discussion, and inshallah, if it does continue forward after, because next week will be the last week until Sheikh Fail will come back, I think, the week after that, and then after that, inshallah, I'll go to Ziyar and pray for you guys, inshallah ta'ala. If it does continue, this is the kind of the, you can want to call it the main surah that we'll keep on referring back to time and time again. And the previous the discussion is online, I think, on the IC's YouTube page, correct? So it's instead of going and because we'll have a lot to cover today, please go back to that one, inshallah. So we'll kind of everything will make sense, inshallah ta'ala. But basically, this verse in the Quran, just a quick recap because it's important. It talks about a group of mu'mineen, a group of believers whom are exclusive in terms of their exclusivity and khususiyya, that they made a promise with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and made a promise with the Messenger of Allah. And you can even say made a promise with the Ahlul Bayt, and that they don't go back on their vow and they fulfill their vow. And then they're amongst those who did this and died. Either they died in battle, so usually it refers to the individuals in Badr and Uhud, because this was revealed in Ahzab, which was the battle of the Confederates. So it mentions individuals that witnessed the battle of Uhud and the battle of Badr, who saw their believing brothers go into battle and die, but that did not shake them one bit. In meaning that even for an inch, they did not say that, now this battle is coming, I'm going to turn back. And then we also mentioned last week, and we said that this verse also has a very wide radius, even though it was revealed for that specific amount of period of time concerning the martyrdom of Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, Sayyid al-Shuhada, and Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and other individuals from the Battle of Uhud al-Badr. It has a wider radius in that it does cover other individuals. And as we will see, I will cover some individuals from the companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada al-Husayn ibn Ali, peace and blessings be upon him. Then we began, of course, with our biography of Mus'ab ibn Umair, who is one of the pious Sahaba of the Prophet. And we looked at basically where this beautiful young man came from in terms of how he was pampered and spoiled by his family members. And then he kind of left everything behind for the sake of the religion of Allah, for the sake of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we're going to continue straight from last time. And the last thing we talked about is basically the Prophet describing the state of Mus'ab ibn Umair. For example, one of the narrators say that, Mus'ab ibn Umair would enter upon the companions and Rasulullah would be sitting and Rasulullah would look at him and he would begin to cry. And the only thing he would have on him is a garment that was patched with fur. And that's all that he left. And before that, he was wearing, as we said, the best of clothing. He was wearing the Yemeni sandal and the Yemeni cloak and the highest quality of clothing you can get in Arabia. And now this guy only has what? One piece of clothing. So now we continue and we look more about Mus'ab. Inshallah, we'll hopefully finish Mus'ab and then touch upon other companions. So one of the qualities of Mus'ab ibn Umair is that he was the first messenger, first safir, as we refer to, that went to Medina, or as the narration say, went to Yathrib, because Yathrib was also one of the names of Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara. And one of the narrators here, of course, for your sake of references, in Kitab al-Awa'il al-Tabarani reports, he says, قال البراء بن عازب أول من قدم علينا المدينة من المهاجرين مصعب بن عمر. So a first from amongst the Muhajirin who came to Medina was Mus'ab ibn Umair. Now, there's a discussion here, was he the first to actually do the hijrah and go to Medina or not? And the kind of conclusion here is that he was the first to be sent officially by the Prophet to do the hijrah to Medina, and as we will see, in order to teach the people of Medina Quran and Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, and law. But the first person to actually do the hijrah, and hopefully we'll look at this next week, is when we look at the biography of a very pious individual who her biography is very underlooked, and she is, as we say, an alam and a very important figure when it comes to the beginning of the message of Islam all the way to the time of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and that is al-Mu'mineen, Salama radiallahu anha, inshallah ta'ala, because the narrations say that Abu Salama actually and Salama were the first to do the hijrah in a way, but Mus'ab ibn Umar was more the first to do the hijrah in the sense that he was officially sent by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of being the Safir. So let's read the following statement. It says, وكان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قد بعث مصعب بن عمير إلى المدينة قبل الهجرة بعد العقبة الثانية يقرأهم القرآن يفقههم في الدين وكان يدعى القاري والمقرأ. So the statement here says that he was known as a Safir, again, the messenger of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وآله, and he was tasked to head to Medina al-Munawwara. And this is way before the major hijrah migration of the Muhajirin when they first came to Medina. And it was after what we refer to as the second Aqaba, was the second pledge of allegiance that the Ansar at the time had given the Prophet, that fulfillment of the vow. And in order to recite to the people the Quran, whatever Quran he had learned from the Prophet, this young man, again, he's a young man, we're talking not about an older gentleman here. This is a young man that was sent on this very difficult journey in order, and he just left his family in Mecca, left everything behind, and he began teaching the people Quran and teaching them Islamic law. And he was called Al-Qara wal-Muqra, as he was both the reciter of the Quran as well as a teacher of the Holy Quran. And then the historians report that when he did come to Medina, at the time in Medina, in Yathrib, there was only about approximately 12 Muslimin, 12 Muslims. That number then increased. So again, it kind of tells you, look how important it is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam puts emphasis on the shabab, on the youth, and that he trusts these young men, right, and these shabab to with a message as heavy as being a representative of Islam. So at the time, he was the only person to go to Medina, and there was only 12 Muslims in Medina, and those were the first 12 that had pledged allegiance to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he would recite for them Quran. Ibn Ishaq says the following statement in his Maghazi. He says, لما انصرف الناس عن العقبة بعث النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم معهم مصعب بن عمير يفقههم. After the second Aqaba, the Prophet dispatched, this is kind of the way to prove that he was dispatched officially with those 12 Muhajirin in order to do what? In order to teach them Islamic law. وكان مصعب هاجر الحبشة الهجرة الأولى ثم رجع إلى مكة ثم هاجر المدينة. This again shows you that Mus'ab ibn Umair participated in two migrations, because we know when we look at Islamic history, there's two main migrations that occurred. The first migration, the first hijrah, occurred when the situation at Mecca became very difficult from Quraysh, and it became the Quraysh in Mecca did not give the Muslims any opportunity to be able to breathe. So Rasulullah said, we have good friends in the land of Abyssinia and the Habasha. I think it's in the modern province of Aksum or somewhere right now, currently in Ethiopia. If you can trace back, some of the historians have traced that area down where the Abyssinian king is buried as well in that vicinity. So you can actually kind of, it's interesting if you look at the current map and you see, if you look at, if you go on the map and you see where Jeddah is currently, and you go approximately 100 or so miles down, there's a location called a Shu'aiba. That was the port, a Shu'aiba, where you will find that Salama says that we each paid half a dinar each in order to get on these merchant ships, and they crossed basically across into what we know as Africa, and then from there they traveled by land south all the way inland until they reached Al-Habasha. So Mus'ab ibn Umair was amongst those individuals who did the first migration as well as the second migration to Medina. Now, another important quality or trait of Mus'ab ibn Umair is that he was actually the first individual to establish the Jum'ah, the Friday prayer, in Medina. And we were talking about before the Prophet himself had come to Medina. This here has been narrated as well, whereas the Ibn al-Jawzi has narrated this. It says, وكتب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله, Rasulullah had sent a letter to Mus'ab ibn Umair أن يقيم صلاة الجمعة في المدينة لما فشى فيها الإسلام. So when Islam began to be prevalent in Medina and the 12 people became more than 20, 30, 40 people, it said that Mus'ab ibn Umair would go door by door. He would not eat, not sleep, and he made sure that he would try to spread Islam in Medina. So he said when Islam became prevalent in Medina, وعلت كلمة التوحيد, when the word of Allah became one, وقد جاء في رسالته الشريف, he wrote فإذا مال النهار عن شطره عند الزوال من يوم الجمعة فتقربوا إلى الله بركعتين. He says that once the sun passes the midday of zawal, right? That's usually the time of dhuhr. As soon as it passes the midday, then pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a 2 units of prayer. And that is meaning that Mus'ab ibn Umair was the first to establish the Friday prayer in Medina. So that's in terms of his. It's about until now. It's as much as we know, and that his hijrah to Medina caused him to convert a lot of people to Islam, other than the 12 of original Ansar, establishing the first Friday prayers, teaching the Quran, reading the Quran as well, teaching Islamic law and fiqh, teaching people prayer. So you can see the amount of reward this man has, right, is truly immense. But of course, on top of that, there's even more to come because now comes the Battle of Badr. So in the Battle of Badr, he also had a very important position in the Battle of Badr. He held the banner of the Muhajirin. Musab, again, Rasulullah giving this banner with this young man from the Muhajirin. And he, of course, as you know, the Battle of Badr was fought. And then the Muslims won the Battle of Badr. And now, of course, we go to the Battle of Uhud. And as well, the Battle of Uhud, he also carried the banner of the Muslimin. And as the narrators say, that he was among the few that stood there steadfast and did not run away from battle. And this is basically his final hours that's narrated in the books of history. I think here is in Sharh al-Nahj ibn Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili. He writes the following. He had a duel with a man by the name of Amr ibn Qayyim al-Laythi. This man came at him in this duel, basically. As you know, when they used to fight, they would fight one-on-one duels, right? So this man came to him and basically severed his right hand. And Mus'ab ibn Umair, knowing the importance, as you're aware, when it comes to these battles, holding the bannerman has a very important role. So Mus'ab then took his banner with his left hand, and then they dealt blows again with each other, and he took out his left hand, right? And then he began to basically hold the banner with his forearms. And then a third blow came from Amr, piercing him with his lance until he died, a shaheed in the battle of Uhud, radiallahu an. And it says that as Mus'ab ibn Umair was dying, of course, is always in that constant remembrance of Allah, and he would recite, وَمَا مُحَمَّدْ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ فَمَاتَ وَقُتِلَ, Surah Imran, verse 144. And it is said that when this happened, of course, this individual, if you remember last week, for those who were with us, we mentioned the individual Anas ibn Nadr, who was not able to witness the Battle of Badr, but he witnessed the Battle of Uhud. And we said that he went to a large number of the Sahaba and told them, why are you running away? And they said, oh, somebody called out Muhammad. Muhammad has been killed. Muhammad has been killed. It is said that when he said this verse, right, this man was the reason that after he killed Mus'ab, this man started running and saying, Muhammad had been killed, Muhammad had been killed, right? Because he recited the verse of the Holy Quran, and that's actually when the Muslims kind of just the ones with low iman kind of dropped everything and ran away. And then Allah says, if you're gonna run away right now, well, even if Muhammad has been killed, at the end of the day, you wish to die on what Muhammad has died, right? And then of course Anas another goes into battle and dies. But basically there was a mistake in the battlefield when this guy started yelling that Muhammad has been killed. And to end, inshallah, it is reported. We also mentioned this kind of last week, but I want to make sure I mention the report. Al-Baladuri in his Ansab al-Ashraf, volume 1, page 336. This kind of shows you how much Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi really loved this man. It says, وقف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله على مصعب بن عمر وهو مقتول فقال رحمك الله لقد رأيتك بمكة وما بها أرق حلة ولا أحسن لمة منك ثم أنت أشعث أغبر وأأمر به فقبر. Like I said, the Prophet had a very close connection to this man. See the amount of that he did to, like what he did for Islam is something that is unfathomable. We cannot even begin to imagine. So it says that the Prophet, again, how many times now? We have three different reports in which the Prophet reminds the people of Mus'ab ibn Umair and his background. And again, even as he stands on his body, as it's on the plains of Uhud, he says to him, "May Allah have mercy upon you. I saw you personally in Mecca with no one having more delicate clothing or more beautiful hair or more pampered than you are, O Mus'ab ibn Umair, and now you are disheveled and covered in dust." Then he had ordered that he be buried. And then it says that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi as well saw him in this state, and this goes back again to the verse in Surah Al-Ahzab, he actually recited the verse in Surah Al-Ahzab, said, and amongst the believers are those who fulfilled their vow in the face of Allah, right? And then he died a martyr, right? And then I am awaiting, as in he's saying, I'm awaiting also my time. And then he also stands on the qatla of Uhud and the martyrs of Uhud, and he says, أيها الناس زوروهم وآتوهم وسلموا عليهم هو الذي نفسي بيده لا يسلم عليهم مسلم إلا يوم القيامة إلا ردوا عليهم السلام. He said, O Muslims, O people, when you visit these martyrs of Uhud, send your greetings upon them, send your peace and blessings upon them, for no one from the Muslims sends their peace and blessings upon them until the day of judgment, except that they will respond to their greetings. And if in case you're wondering as well where Mus'ab bin Umair is buried in terms of how high this man's status is in the eyes of Allah, is that for those who have been to Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, when you go to Mount Uhud, of course you will notice an enclosure, right? And then you'll notice there is, in the middle of the enclosure, there is of course Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, Sayyid al-Shuhada, buried. The grave right next to Hamza alayhi salam is the grave of Mus'ab ibn Umair. He's had his own grave next to Hamza buried, and all the other Shuhada of Uhud are buried on the other side. So his status in that he's buried next to the uncle of the Prophet and the protector of the Prophet and has that status in the eyes of Allah is a very special place to be, next to the uncle of the Prophet. And unfortunately, like I said last time when I was here last week, is that um, I found out about this man due to my own shortcomings, of course. This is my own, I'm talking about myself, not longer than 2 months ago. And feel I feel horrible that it took me more than 30 years to know about such an individual who has had a great role in Islam that we can take lessons from. A man that came from everything and then had to let go everything for the sake of Allah and for the sake of the Prophet. And the fact that I was in Medina in February, January to do our Umrah, and I visited the grave of Hamza, and I kept on asking who's buried next to Hamza because you see two headstones, right? And I feel bad. So inshallah, the next time you guys go to Medina, know that Mus'ab ibn Umair is buried right next to Hamza Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And of course, we mentioned this last week as well, but to end with this as we move on to the next companion, is that remember we said he came from everything and he left with nothing. So just to mention you the source for this, in Tabaqat al-Kubra, Ibn Sa'ad reports the following image as well. He says, وَإِنَّ مُصْعَبَ ibn Umair مَاتَ وَلَمْ يَتْرُكَ إِلَّا ثَوْبًا. Mus'ab ibn Umair passed, he did not have but one piece of clothing. Think about that, by the way, for a second. A man that came from everything. I know I'm repeating myself, right? I apologize, right? But I'm just trying to. This man was, in a way, the richest of one of the richest families in Mecca, right? Like we said, he had the best of clothing, the best of food. He only had one piece of clothing. كان إذا غطوا رأسه خرجت رجلاه. When they would cover his head with the piece of clothing that he had, his feet would come out. وإذا غطوا به رجليه خرج رأسه. And when they cover his feet, right, his head, part of his head comes out. فقال رسول الله غطوا رأسه وجعلوا على رجليه الأثير. Cover his head and then put grass on his legs. And that's how Mus'ab ibn Umair was buried in Uhud, with one piece of clothing, right, in which his whole body is covered except his legs. There's some grass placed on his legs. And of course, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the status that this man has on the day of judgment and the reward that he has in the eyes of Allah, being able to fulfill that vow that Allah mentions in Surah Al-Ahzab, and to be able to not go and turn back on his heels like others from that period of time. Now, we're going to skip all the way to the year 60 after Hijrah, because I promised I talk about some of the companions of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, seeing that we are still in the month of Muharram. And also, before I do mention that, it is important to note as well that the 25th of Muharram does mark the martyrdom of Ali ibn al-Hussein as-Sajjad Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, right? So these are days of musibah, these are days of tragedy in which Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein, our fourth Imam, and for those who have read the history and read the literature, the maqatil literature, and these accounts of what happened, in my own personal opinion, I find that Ali ibn Hussein had to undergo, in a way, so much more. Yes, his father and what happened to Hussein on the day of Ashura is a day unlike any other, and that's the way he was brutally murdered. But now imagine having to live with that image of your father and your brother and your 6-month-year-old brother, right? Your Abdullah Rabi' in that state, right, for the next 30 years, right? And then being in an ummah where he comes in front of Abdullah ibn Ziyad, and Abdullah ibn Ziyad boasts about, didn't I kill? It's like when they brought him to the majlis of Abdullah ibn Ziyad, what happened? He said, "Who is that individual who was in the corner on his cane?" He said, "That is Ali." He's like, "Didn't we not just kill Ali?" He's like, "Yeah, I had a brother named Ali who was older than me that you killed in Karbala," right? And of course, the state he was put in the fact that he, from Karbala to Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Sham, and all the way back to Medina, as the historians report as well, that he was placed in what we refer to as a jami'ah. A jami'ah is a type of shackle, very humiliating type of shackle, because Ali ibn Hussein al-Sajjad was in a state where he was very sick. So in order for him to be placed on the camel so that they can ride, this jama'a was a kind of metal shackle that they would be able to place his hands in his neck so that he will not move. And then they would tie him across the stomach of the camel. And of course, now imagine that as you're riding, you'd be flipping up and down, and they had to stop him several times. So that happened, and it turned. And then in the event of Sham, it says that they met. There was an old man, and this old man saw him. He's like, "Can I do anything for you?" He's like, I'm a rich individual. What can I do?" He's like, "The only thing I want you to do is, if you can, buy some pieces of cloth so the women can cover their faces." And then he said, "If there's any more of your cloth that's left over," he said, "can you just put some of this cloth under where the shackles are, because there was so much bleeding coming from those shackles." So he spent his whole life dealing with a nation that cursed his father, a nation that looked down upon Imam Ali alayhi salam, a nation who looked down upon the Prophet, a nation who treated the daughters of the Prophet, the daughters, which is the most sacred individuals in the history of mankind, as the narrations themselves, as Sayyidah Zainab al-Kubra alayhi salam says herself, we were treated as if we were captives from the Romans or the Turks. We were not, we were disrespected, we were humiliated in front of Allah and His Prophet. And then he had to live all of this for 30 years and being under these pulpits in which they curse Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayh, until he left this world, of course, on a day like the 25th of Muharram, carrying with him a legacy. And you know his legacy, of course, in Shahr Ramadan, Dua Abu Hamza Thumali, his legacy, right? Sheikh Fayyad always encourages everybody to recite Dua Abu Hamza and its beautiful words and a legacy like Sahif al-Sajjadiyah, right? And that's a legacy like the treaties of rights, al-Huquq. And the Imam used, by the way, the Imam used dua. People always think that dua is just a way for, I know we're sidetracking, I do apologize, but I have to give the Imam his right because we are. But people think that dua is just a way for him to, was to supplicate with Allah. But if you pay attention, there are books written by the scholars in which they actually have, there's a book that's called Al-Dalil ala Sahif al-Sajjadiyah, the kind of pointer towards Sahif al-Sajjadiyah, where this scholar, all he does is extract the different scenarios and topics that the Imam discusses in his dua. Either it be Tawheed, oneness of Allah, either it be prophethood, either it be imamate, either it be family rights, either it be, your rights of your brothers. Inside the same dua in which he's using to teach us how to seek forgiveness is the same dua which is teaching us other rights and other rules and other theology and belief and fiqh and law, right? So inshallah, when you do come across these supplications, try to look at them in more detail. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the next individual we're going to look at is one of the companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam al-Hussein, peace and blessings be upon him. And I'm also not as looked at as much. and his name is Abdullah ibn Yaqtar. And also there's another individual, Qais ibn Mushar, and we'll mention him in a bit more because they're kind of intertwined in a way. But this man, Abdullah ibn Yaqtar, again, we don't know too much about his life. What we do know is that he was very close to Sayyid al-Shuhada, and he was also, see, the reason I chose Mus'ab ibn Umair fit perfectly, being the messenger of Rasulullah, because Abdullah ibn Yaqtar, like the cousin of Imam al-Hussein, Muslim ibn Aqil, who was known as the Safir of Aba Abdullah, the one who was the messenger of Hussein alayhi salam, sending the letters to Kufa and so on and so forth. Abdullah ibn Yaqtar is also one of the individuals that falls under this category of being a Safir or being a messenger of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. So let's read a bit about whatever we know about this individual as reported by the historians. Um, Qutb al-Din al-Rawandi in his book Al-Khara'ij wal-Jara'ih mentions the following. Abdullah ibn Yaqtar ibn Abi Aqub al-Laythi min Bani Layth ibn Bakr ibn Abd Munaf ibn Kunana. He says Abdullah ibn Yaqtar is from Banu Layth ibn Bakr, from the sons of Abd Munaf, from the sons of Kunana. Then he says وكان من موالي أهل البيت عليهم السلام فأبوه يقطر كان خادما عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. As for his father يقطر, he was a servant to رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. وأمه, his mother ميمونة, تعمل في بيت أمير المؤمنين. She also used to work in the house of Imam Ali عليه السلام. Right away that kind of tells you that this man grew up in the household of revelation, and that his father served Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his mother Maymuna worked in the house of Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam. So his upbringing is something special to begin with. It continues on, and then it says that he was born approximately 3 days, according to the historians, 3 days before the birth of Imam al-Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam, right? So though we don't have an actual date by the historians of the date of his birth, from this we can conclude that he was born either the first or first of Sha'ban or just before the end of Rajab, around the same year, which is the third year after Hijrah, right? That's kind of an estimation. Again, that's an estimation. We have no clear cut, but we do have a historical report saying he was born 3 days before Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Um, Sheikh Muhammad Samawi has a book called Absar al-Ain fi Ansar al-Hussein, in which he discusses the companions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So he reports the following. He says, Abdullah ibn Yaqtur al-Himyari, Radi' al-Hussein alayhi salam. So he is known as Radi' al-Hussein, and we'll look at that in a second. كانت أمه خاضنة للحسين كأم قيس بن ضريح للحسن، ولم يكن رضع عندها ولكنه يسمى رضيعا لعبد الله لخضانته أمه للحسين عليه السلام. He said, so رضيع al-Hussein, somebody who's a رضيع or أخ بالرضاعة, is somebody who was breastfed by the same mother. So therefore they become a brother in رضاعة. So he's referred to as Radi' al-Hussein, right, in the books of Tarajim, in the books of biography. And it says that his mother was a nursemaid for Hussein, similar to al-Qais was a nursemaid for Hassan. But the historians do report that he was not actually nursed by her, but in fact he was called Radi' to Abdullah because his mother basically raised Hussein. And they say that somebody who was raised as well in the Arab, somebody who was raised in the same household by an individual, can also be referred to as Radi'. We continue, and then it says that Abdullah ibn Yaqtar um, had a very close familiar relationship with the prophetic household, even though he was from Himyar, from the Arabs of the south. And then it says that he was also possibly a companion of one of the Sahaba of Rasulullah. And the evidence to that actually is that Ibn Hajar in his Asaba mentions him from the Sahaba. But let's say, for example, for a second, that saying does not exist. Just leave that aside, right? It's only one saying. The only, from what I found in my research, Ibn Hajar is the only individual who mentions from the Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says he has no hadith from the Prophet. But the fact that he grew up in the house of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, I'm talking now in the realm of possibility. In fact, that Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Hassan grew up in a household near their grandfather Rasulullah, that in the realm of possibility, the possibility is very high that he was from the Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Most of these companions you find actually about Abdullah, right, that grew up in that time period or were born in that time period in Medina. A lot of them that are companions of Sahaba. Some of them we have direct quotes from the ulama. Some of them we have possibilities, they're very high possibilities because either their dates were very similar or some of them were even born before Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. Some of them, like for example, Hayy ibn Mudahir, right? It's a very big discussion. Was he a Sahabi? Was he not a Sahabi? He was way older than Abu Abdullah Hussein alayhi salam, much, much older. And he also was, no, there's a couple of interactions that he had with other Sahaba. So the possibility is very high, right? That he was a companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa um, and then I think that's about it in terms, yeah, in terms of like that's all we have really of his biography, unfortunately. Um, so we do know that he was very close lover of Al Muhammad. He was known to serve in the household of Al Muhammad, and which is why his status in the eyes of Sayyid al-Shuhada to be able to be given in a way the the importance of taking care of those letters to send to Kufa. Imam Hussein does not send anybody. We know, for example, Muslim ibn Aqil was his, as he says, إِنِّي أَرْسُلُ إِلَيْكُمْ ثِقَّتِي وَابْنَ عَمِّي. I sent to you my trustworthy cousin, Muslim ibn Aqil, right? And he was known to be a thiqa of Abu Abdullah, the trustworthy brother of Hussein alayhi salam. Abdullah ibn Yaqtar would be one of those individuals as he grew up with Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. So this is where I mentioned the individual Qais, because here's where the historians are like kind of split. So this other individual, Qais ibn Mushar, excuse me, who was also known to be a Safir, because basically Muslim ibn Aqil was the first one to be sent to Kufa. But after that, between these two individuals, we don't know who was sent first, between Qais and Abdullah ibn Yaqtar, who was sent after Muslim ibn Aqil to go to Kufa and to bring the messages back to Kufa and then back to Medina and so on and so forth. This is where the historians kind of are in a divide, because their names either appear in a similar story or vice versa. But the least you can conclude is that both of these individuals had some sort of play in delivering letters to Kufa or delivering the letters of Muslim ibn Aqil after what happened in Kufa back to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So what I have for you here, it says that he was sent after Muslim ibn Aqil to Kufa with letters to what the response of the Kufans had written. And it took me a while, I've been trying to put this together, but the sort of conclusion that I got to, and again, it's in a realm of discussion, it could still be discussed further on, because the views of all the scholars, you know, the Shi'i and the non-Shi'i, the historians in general, are split, is that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam first sent Muslim ibn Aqil to Kufa, and he sent him with Qais ibn Mushar, right? And then when Muslim ibn Aqil reached the point, if you remember the story, there was a point where Muslim ibn Aqil had hired two guides. These two guides, due to the thirst, right, into the heat, they had passed. And at that point, before he reached Kufa, it said that he wrote a letter and he said that I send this letter with Qais in order to go to Sayyid al-Shuhada, right, and tell him of what just happened. So then Qais would then go back to Imam Hussein alayhi salam and connect with him. I think it would have been still, and he would still have made it to Mecca at this time. And then on their way back, basically, in order to get the message to Imam Hussein alayhi salam back to Kufa, it says that at that time, Abdullah ibn Yaqtar sent that final message. And then Qais did not go back until further on after the Muslim ibn Aqil and Hani ibn Urwa and Abdullah ibn Yaqtar, because it says that when Imam Hussein reached an area called Zubala, that is when the news, because there's a historical report that says when he reached Zubala, the news of Muslim ibn Aqil and Hani ibn Urwa and Abdullah ibn Yaqtar reached Abu Abdullah. And then actually he recited the same verse, by the way, when mu'minin rijalun sadaqu ma ahadullah alayh, right? That the believers are those who fulfilled the vow of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it said that after this, he had sent one final letter with Qais. And in this letter, it says that he had the names specifically addressed to the individuals from Kufa. And it says that on the way, basically, Hussein ibn Umayr had caught Qais ibn Mushar. And then, for those who have seen some of the series that have been depicted, these scenarios, you probably see that. I think it's in the, I'm not sure if it was in the Mukhtar series or in one of the other series, where basically he begins to rip up this letter, right? And kind of destroy it because it had names of important individuals that Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad cannot get his hands on. Because if he gets hands on, this is basically a whole, names of all the individuals in Kufa that are ready to stand for Sayyid al-Shuhada. So in his, he knows that if this goes into the hands of Ubaidullah Ziyad, then it's not good. Then for me, being having this aman and this promise from Imam Hussein, I'll destroy that letter. And of course, Qais was then taken to Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, and he was, of course, there was a conversation that happened between him and Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, in which then he told him to be killed, and he was also thrown from Qasr al-Imara in Kufa, and he was thrown from on top of the Qasr. He passed away, he died right away actually, and then Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad had ordered him, on top of all of that, to cut him into pieces and make sure that everybody witnesses this event. So that was Qais. But when it comes to Abdullah ibn Yakhtar, a very similar event happened as well. So it says that this last letter that was sent, the original one, he was also caught by Hussein. So this Hussein ibn Umayr seems to be the individual that has been in the care of taking care of kind of the vicinity of Kufa to see if anybody comes in or out. Because it seems that in both cases, Hussein ibn Umayr, by the way, who, if you have read the Maqatil literature, you know that Hussein ibn Umayr was one of the individuals who had a hand in killing Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. So for those who have read the Maqtal in detail, right, one of the incidents on the day of Ashura, when it says that when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was pierced in his waist, for example, right, that specific, the Maqatil literature say that that individual, Hussein ibn Umayr, was the one who pierced Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. So he was also in Karbala, this individual. So Abdullah ibn